I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Welcome back, everybody. What's been fun is I've had a few listeners say that they've used what they've heard on the podcast in conversation at work. And that was really a huge part of why I wanted to do this, is so people can keep up in conversation on the workplace and be able to chat with the VPs and, feel like they know what they're talking about. So that was fun. Just a little podcast update. I think I've said this on an episode before, but I am booked till September with guests. So feeling really good about that. Taking a pause on it so I can work on some other things, which is, I've been taking some meetings to increase listenership, kind of meeting with some other professional organizations that can help get the word out. And then also I'm still having some sponsor conversations. That is still happening. There's conversations around getting video for this podcast. It's a little harder than it seems, but it is something that is in the works. So those are the podcast updates. But I'm here at Seattle University on campus. I love being on a college campus. It makes me feel excited and hopeful for the future again. I'm with Eduardo Penalver, president of the Seattle University. Hello.
Good morning.
So you're one of the few guests I haven't met in person before, but I've heard your name and you've spoke at many events. Why did you decide to say yes to this?
I rarely say no to podcast invitations. It's just something I enjoy doing, and I love talking about higher education and about Seattle University. And one of our goals as a university is to connect ourselves really closely to the Seattle business community. Mm-hmm. So this was a great fit. Perfect.
I love it. I thought you were going to say because your EA told you to. I was emailing with your team. They're very sweet. So a little bit about you. You became president in 2021. And from 2014 until 2021, you served as the dean of Cornell Law School. Your legal scholarship focuses on property and land use, as well as law and religion. You've also authored a few books. And then we were just chatting that coming up next year, you're going to be the chair of what's called CDRT. That's a Community Development Roundtable, and it's affiliated with the Seattle Chamber. It's a big deal. So that's a little bit about you. Very excited to have you here. Before we dive into the news, why are you so passionate about higher education and law?
I loved being a student, and some of us, we love it so much we never leave. And I actually did leave for a few years before I came back to campus. But higher education is the most reliable vehicle we have for social mobility in this country, and so I love working in higher ed, and I just love ideas, and I love at our best, universities are places where we spend a lot of time playing with and thinking about ideas and discussing and debating, and so it's just a energetic and passionate kind of community, and I'm always energized by that. I love being on campus.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, me too. I already feel like a hopeful 20-year-old again, so I love it. All right, well, here's the top 5 stories. First one, Seattle CEO is guilty of wire fraud. Number 2, Melinda Gates steps down from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Our third story is Kaiser Permanente is selling some land. Fourth story is Chateau Ste Michelle. The changes over the years. The headline is that there's some leadership changes, but we'll talk a little bit more about what's been going on over at Chateau. And our last story is about Amazon's new project, Cooper. I think that's how you're saying it, Cooper.
Yeah, I had a question about
right?
that.
I don't know. I should have looked that up. Whoops. Some of you might be saying, why, if you're watching the news, why am I not covering Amazon's AWS CEO, Adam Selipsky, stepping down? And that's because the article at the time, that was all that the news is that he's stepping down, and mostly because next week I have a reporter coming on that focuses on Amazon. So I'm going to probably ask her a little bit more about that topic. So I did know that happened, if anybody's wondering, but we're not going to cover it this episode. So are you ready to talk about fraud?
Yes.
It's perfect because you have this law background, so you can kind of jump in and give us some education there. But here's the story. So if you guys remember Alex Halverson from my very first episode, he's a journalist at PSBJ. He was one of the ones that was covering this story. He said he got a call. He told me I could say this on air, but he got a call out of the blue from someone and said, "Hey, I used to work for this company, and I think the owner screwed everyone out of millions." And that started Alex getting leaked documents and kind of really diving into what's going on. So here, let me try and explain the history of this. Basically, this guy, Stephen Baird, he's 68 now, so younger before, but he starts this company called S-Ray. So not X-Ray, but S-Ray. He starts it in Portland in 2008. It's ultrasound technology to scan your teeth instead of using invasive X-ray technology, which we all hate when you go to the dentist and you have to bite down on that horrendously uncomfortable thing. So he starts it in 2008. He moves it up to Seattle in 2016. By 2017, employees start leaving. By 2018, hundreds had invested though. So including like dentists, surgeons, other people with medical degrees. So you have these people that seem like they know what they're talking about investing. And they're investing $11 million at the end of the day is what was put into this company. He tells shareholders, yeah, this is approved by the FDA. And he posts on his website, this is totally approved by the FDA. It wasn't. You've got executives leaving and suing him. By 2019, all employees but Baird had left. And there's still only a prototype had been developed, so not an actual product. He is continuing to get investments until March 2021. This is reminding me a little bit of like, did you watch the Elizabeth Holmes stuff?
Yes,
you know about that?
Yeah, for sure.
Right? It kind of feels like that. And I'm almost honestly like impressed that you can raise $11 million without a product and just talking about how annoying the X-ray is. The part of why this is also not great is that he starts transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars to him and his wife's accounts. He creates kind of two shell companies that he's writing checks saying lab equipment. And what he's really doing is he bought a luxury car and a massive home on Bainbridge Island. This just feels like classic fraud story, right? So the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, accuse him of like, hey, something's going on here. Let's investigate. They find out that he's raised $2 million. Then the DOJ and the FBI get involved and they realize it's actually closer to 11 million. So the story that came out today, this is all, obviously kind of happening a few years ago, but the story that came out this week or last week was that he pled guilty and he can face up to 20 years in prison, but we think with a plea deal, it will be less. Is there something I left out on that article from what you read?
No, that sounds like the story. And it's,
yeah.
I think it's always interesting. These things crop up from time to time, right? And business people, especially entrepreneurs are optimists and they make promises and they're, there's this slippery slope from really exuberant optimism and, to puffery to fraud.
Yeah.
Right. And at some point you cross the line into fraud, and that really all focuses on the intent of the person, the intent to deceive. But when you think about salesmanship and puffery, when you're out, kind of pumping up a new product or a new company, exaggeration is pretty endemic. So it's interesting. I worked on a case also involving ultrasound.
Oh.
When this was during my brief period, not on campus. So during a couple of years, I was in legal practice in Washington, D.C., and it actually involved a company in Seattle called ATL Ultrasound, which was a subsidiary of Philips. And our client was a 3D ultrasound startup that had been negotiating to try to get either acquired or invested in by this company in Seattle. And over the course of their conversations, the person they were dealing with made lots of claims about the interest that ATL had in making this investment and how far along we were in the process. And then ultimately they decided not to make the investment. And it turned out that a lot of the things he had been saying were exaggerations of where we stood. We ended up winning a $100 million verdict in North Carolina. And that was a case of what's called promissory fraud, where you promise to do something and you don't have the intention to do it or at the time you make the promise. And when I describe that to business people, it sort of freaks them out because they say, oh, we do that all the time when we're negotiating, and
right?
It's not intentional. You need to be able to prove intent, and that's the challenge. And we did have evidence of intent to deceive, but it is, this is something that I think business leaders need to be aware of, that we want to be optimistic. We want to project confidence. We need to make sure that we're not deceiving people.
Right. Because you read about all of those, like you said, the entrepreneurs that are doing like Series A and all the funding, like they don't have the actual product, but they have the idea. Yeah. So that is very normal and common. But like, where is the line in, okay, this actually isn't going to happen? And I feel like with the Elizabeth Holmes story, there was a point where like, okay, this isn't, it's a good idea, but it's not going to actually happen. Yeah. So I'm curious with the Stephen story with S-Ray, did he have good intentions in the beginning? Probably.
Probably, right? He had an idea.
Yeah.
And then the product maybe didn't perform as he expected. And at what point did he then stop leveling with people? And there, in this case, you see lots of evidence around the behavior that points towards an intent to deceive and the diversion
like when you
of the
start
money.
buying luxury cars, you're
exactly.
like, okay, I don't think you really care about the X-rays anymore.
But it probably didn't start there, right?
Yeah,
it probably didn't start as a scheme.
I agree. One more question before we move to the next story.
And I just want to say the judge
yeah.
in the case, Richard Jones, is a Seattle University alum.
Oh, no way.
And just joined our board of trustees. So it's
okay. Well, let's get his thoughts on
Seattle University connection to the case.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love that. Speaking of Seattle University, I was kind of thinking about how, you're also raising money from donors and you're promising a new program, a new building, more students. I don't know what else you're promising. So for you, what is that line? Because what if you're going to do a new program, something happens you can't, do a new building, something happens you can't, what happens then?
Well, so we always try to, build into our conversations the possibilities that things might not happen the way that we expect. So when we accept a gift for a particular purpose, we usually build into that gift agreement some alternative if that becomes impossible. Mm-hmm. Again, I think it's really important to be honest with people about our capabilities and our limitations, and we never want people to make a gift under a misconception. These are university philanthropy. I think this is true for most nonprofit philanthropy, is a relationship business, and it really depends on trust. It's not like selling a car. Yeah. Right. I mean, we want people to have long relationships with Seattle University, and the way that we do that is by following through and being really
you can't
reliable
give it back to them,
partners.
Right?
What's that?
You can't give it back to them.
Well, if once a gift is made, it's made, right? And unless someone can say, well, this gift was procured through fraud, which, is possible, right? Mm-hmm. Once the gift is made, it's final. It's, people don't always understand this about gifts, right? But a gift is a transfer of property. Mm. So if I give you my car, it's now your car. And I can't come back next week and say, I want my car back. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can choose to give it back to me, but it's now your car. Yeah. And so when we receive a gift, it's ours, right? The money is ours, or the property is ours. And once it's ours, then we're actually governed by nonprofit law, and we have fiduciary obligations towards that property of Seattle University. We can't just give it back to a donor or redirect it to another charity at the donor's request. They've given it to us. Yeah. And so to do that, to divert a gift or to return a gift requires an action by our board of trustees and approval by the attorney general of the state. So it's something that people don't fully understand, the finality of gift giving. Gift giving is like selling or buying. It transfers property in a very complete way. Yeah,
that's really interesting. All right, moving on to our next story. Melinda Gates steps down. So she's leaving the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is now going to be rebranded as just the Gates Foundation, which we often call it that anyway. And she divorced from Bill in 2021. So now she's leaving with $12.5 billion of her own, so she can use that for her own initiatives. Her total wealth is a little unknown. I'm sure she's got a lot of other wealth in stocks and things like that, but the public number of 12.5 is what she can use to kind of reinvest and donate to other organizations. She has something called Pivotal Ventures, which is her LLC. So she, there's little public information about what that's donating to, but what I'm excited about is to kind of see, all the articles are like, we're excited to see what comes next. She's an incredible philanthropist. Her last day is going to be June 7th. And then a couple of facts about the Gates Foundation. Till now, they had $75 billion in grant payments as of the end of last year. One of the largest in the world and by far the largest in Washington State. So this is a massive organization. For you, I guess, do you have a relationship with the Gates Foundation with Seattle U?
We have many different points of contact with the Gates Foundation. They made a generous gift to our last campaign in support of our newest science building. We do a number of philanthropic projects with them, especially around community engaged learning and early childhood education. So a lot of, I would say, kind of transactional philanthropy, where they're essentially contracting with us to undertake some projects.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Nice. So something that Melinda French Gates focuses on is women and families and minorities. So how have you seen gender and diversity change at Seattle U over the years, or if you wanted to speak to your law school experience as well?
Sure. I mean, higher ed has generally, just over the course of my lifetime, become more and more diverse on both gender and racial and economic fronts. In terms of gender diversity, 40 years ago, universities were 60% men, 40% women. It's now reversed, right?
Really?
Where around the country, they're about 60% female, 40% male. Oh. And then that number of men on campus continues to decline. And that's reflected at Seattle University. Our undergraduate population is about 60-40 women, men. And on the racial diversity front, the same, just very steady growth in the racial diversity of our student body, to the point where, if you look at students who identify as only white, right, not two or more categories, but just only white, it's a minority of our student body. And we were recently recognized by the federal government as a minority-serving institution, and we're the only selective minority-serving institution in Washington State. We're recognized as an Asian American, Native American, Pacific Island serving institution by the Department of Education, which is just a designation they give to schools that meet certain criteria for demographics, but also financial aid support and student support. And that's something we're proud of. It, diversity of all kinds, including racial diversity, is really an essential part of how Jesuit universities understand our mission. We were founded initially to serve Catholic immigrants who were being excluded from other higher ed institutions around the country, and then over time, that sense of service to access to higher education has expanded to include all groups that have historically been excluded from higher education. Yeah,
and do you have a goal that you're working towards in terms of diversity?
We want to fully reflect the diversity of the communities we're drawing from. And provide opportunity to people who lack it. So I wouldn't say we have numerical goals. We have these broad commitments and goals to being a school that provides a vehicle of opportunity for people from all backgrounds. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, we'll keep an eye on what Melinda French Gates does. I'm excited to see that. It is exciting. She's immediately become, she already was, right? But now striking out on her own. This is one of the largest women-led foundations, philanthropies in the world. Yeah. And it'll be exciting to see where she takes it. I absolutely agree. Okay, our third story is Kaiser Permanente is ditching a large facility at Yesler Terrace. So they announced this project, I think it was 4 days before the pandemic in 2020, that they're going to build this large facility, and it's 1.6 acres. They just announced last week that they are selling that property, that 1.6 acres, to King County. And Harborview Medical Center is owned by King County and managed under contract by UW-Medicine. So this sale does have to get approved by the city council. There's a lot of jargon in this article of, we're going to use it for much needed improvements and stay within the ideals of blah, blah, blah. They're not really letting us know what they're doing yet with that land. But something interesting is that Kaiser did acquire this land from the Seattle Housing Authority. So it sits on a larger 30-acre property, which currently has a little over 500 ultra-low income households. And they want to turn that into mixed income neighborhoods with up to 5,000 homes, which I had to read a few times to make sure that wasn't a typo. So the reason why I bring this article into the conversation is that you have a background in property law, and you focus a little bit on kind of how property law or how land ownership affects the laws that are made today. So I wanted to give you space to kind of talk about that. Well, Yesler Terrace is a really exciting project, and Seattle University has been very involved at Yesler Terrace for some time.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
We have an entity on campus called the Sundborg Center for Community Engagement, which is named after my predecessor, Father Steve Sundborg, who was president at Seattle University for 24 years and oversaw the creation of this effort. So we're very committed to community engaged learning and the Center for Community Engagement takes a place-based approach to our work that focuses on the neighborhoods immediately around Seattle University, the historic center of the Black community in Seattle, the Central District, Yesler Terrace, and the International District. And so Yesler Terrace is part of the footprint of that work. And so we have a lot of involvement in, tutoring and in advising entrepreneurs and all kinds of work that we do with the residents of Yesler Terrace and the students at Bailey Gatzert Elementary School, which is adjacent to Yesler Terrace. And we have people who are studying Yesler Terrace as it moves from what it was, which was a lot of low-rise kind of monoculture of low-income housing, to now a much denser mixed income community. So more, it's the houses that were torn down and they're now being replaced. Yeah. With many more houses, but also a greater mix of incomes, and is being held up as a model for that kind of public housing and sort of mixed use development around the country. And it's a work in progress. So as Seattle grows, it needs to increase its density if it's not going to displace low income people from the city. And I think what's happening at Yesler Terrace is a model for how that can happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a good thing. I'm hearing from you.
I think I think more housing is always a good thing in Seattle. We have a significant housing shortage for housing of all kinds, and so finding ways to build more affordable housing, but also just more housing generally is good. I think having mixed income neighborhoods is good. When you have extreme income segregation, as we do around the country, it has really negative impacts for the people who are isolated in pervasively low income communities. They don't have the same access to all kinds of resources and networks. And so, I'm a supporter of finding ways to mix housing types to bring people of different backgrounds and incomes together. Yeah.
I know our next story, we're going to talk about zoning a little bit, but do you have any comments on, because I know you wrote the book about land ownership and how, for this case, city council does have to approve that land purchase. So any thoughts on kind of the involvement of city council and politics when it comes to land?
Well, land ownership, is an important institution in a kind of culturally for us and certainly economically. But especially in urban areas now, it's just one piece of a puzzle. You can own land, but it doesn't mean there's a lot you can do with it. And we'll talk about the Chateau Ste Michelle story in a second. But ownership is just the first step. And we always talk about ownership and entitlement. So what does the zoning law allow us to do with our land? And then there's still the process you have to go through to move from entitlement to execution. And that's, that involves all kinds of design review and environmental impact review and neighborhood consultation. All of these things they have good reasons behind them. Zoning laws, building codes, housing codes, they all add to the cost of construction, whether it's for commercial or residential. And I think we need to sometimes just step back and say, okay, do we need all this process? And what are we doing to make it possible, to make it easier for housing to be built, knowing that we have such a shortage of housing in the city of Seattle, and knowing how much it costs to build a unit of housing here as compared to other jurisdictions. So if we want Seattle to be a place that's affordable to people of all backgrounds, that's part of it's not the only thing that we need to look at, but we do need to look at the regulatory structures we're building around land ownership. Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, so we alluded to it, but our fourth story is Chateau Ste Michelle. So the headline isn't really that big of a headline. It's Jen Bell. It's she's the chief transformation officer, and she left Chateau to go to Avale as their COO. The reason why I bring this story up is that I don't know how many people know what's going on with Chateau Ste Michelle, and it is coming up on their concert series, so I thought it was a little bit relevant. But I wanted to give a bit of background before we kind of dive into what is to come for this property. So in 2021, they sell to a private equity firm, Sycamore Partners, for $1.2 billion. And what I think is interesting, the private equity firm buys it in 2021, and then a year later in 2022 is like, JK, I'm going to sell it. Who wants to buy it? So in my mind, I feel like they're just trying to flip it and make some money, I guess.
They don't end up selling it. They take it off the market and they decide, okay, actually we'll try and fix it. So in 2022, they move production from Woodinville to Eastern Washington. So they take production all out of the property over there in Woodinville, and to kind of take over some of that space that they were using. And also it's a huge property. It's 118 acres. Yeah. So their idea to revamp it is to build a hotel, build some townhouses, add some retail, a new music venue, and a few other things. But so the current zoning does allow for this, but they're trying to get more denser housing. Mm-hmm. So this is what they're proposing to the council and saying, we want to rezone this a little bit so we can build more housing. Then in 2023, they laid off some more people. The departures are interesting, I think, since private equity coming in. We've got the CEO David Deary left, the Washington market president Toby Whitmire left, and the head of communications Ryan Pennington left. I always think that's a little bit of a sign when all of leadership is leaving, when somebody new comes in and buys it. So I'll leave you all can think about that. But the conversation I want to have with you is a little bit more about the zoning. So as I mentioned, they're trying to rezone it. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great story and it's an interesting example of something that you see a lot, which is a piece of private property that the public cares about deeply. I mean, right. Maybe the quintessential example of this is Penn Station in New York City, which was beautiful Beaux-Arts train station, built in the early 20th century and was torn down in the early 1960s to build Madison Square Garden. Oh. And its destruction was this kind of traumatic experience for New York, but it was a privately owned train station. Oh. Looked a lot like Grand Central Station, which has now, been preserved through landmark designation, but this was before there were landmark designation laws. Mm-hmm. And so people never contemplated that something like that could be or would be torn down, but it was. And actually spurred the creation of these landmark preservation laws. But the conversations around it are so interesting because this is private property, and you tend to think owners can do what they want with their property. The councilwoman in Woodinville, compared the winery to Central Park. Mm-hmm. Central Park is publicly owned property. That's a park. Mm. This is a piece of private land, and so, but if people treat it like a park, the owner might object to that, right? Because they want to do something with it to make some money from it. That's generally why people own property.
That chateau is so iconic to Woodinville that you can't have Seattle without the Space Needle. You can't, and so I remember.
But you kind of think, okay, if it's so important to Woodinville, then maybe they should buy it and turn it into a park.
Yeah. That's true.
They're trying to sort of prevent the owner from doing something that's economically productive because they want to keep it in a less developed state. And this is a common conflict between the owners of land and members of the public. And we tend to think of land ownership as this individualistic thing. And when at least when I write about land ownership, I think about it more as a relationship between the owner and everyone else. And it's sort of a negotiation, and that's what's happening here, right? They're negotiating over how they can use their land and how Woodinville will allow them to use it. There are all kinds of legal and constitutional constraints around those negotiations that are designed to protect both the owner and the interests of the public.
Yeah, I was saying a little before where I didn't love the idea of them bringing in a lot more housing. I mean, I know we need housing, but when I read it, for some reason, it felt like private equity was just coming in to make a buck wherever they could.
Yeah, but that's what they do. That's why they, we're in a market economy, and that's what market actors are kind of incentivized to do. And we think part of the logic of that is the thought that all of us going about our business kind of attending, this is the classic kind of hidden hand, right? Mm-hmm. If they're doing what makes sense for them and their investors, and that generates value that we all benefit from to some extent from that value being created. In this case, there is a need for housing in this region, and that's a good point. And if there's not housing built there, where will it be built? And on the other hand, we also need to preserve open space and physical beauty of our community. And what's the best way to do that? These are complicated issues, and this is one of the reasons I love land use. Is it just it triggers these really important conversations, and it always gets down to the super local, like this piece of land in this location, and its history and its relationship to this community. it's very hard to make sweeping generalizations about land use. It takes you down to the granular level and into the local context. And so it's a great story for me for that reason. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with. I imagine it'll be a complex negotiation, and neither side will get 100% of what they want.
I agree. I'm sure that's probably what's going to happen. I Googled and there's no update. I think in February, I believe, is when they were trying to get this approved through the council, and I have not seen an update. So we'll have to keep at it. But all right, on to our last story. So Amazon is establishing a logistics facility in Everett, and they're partnering with a technical college in Kirkland by way of a certification program for aerospace assembly and manufacturing. So basically, Amazon's partnering with a school. The school is going to give them students to work with them and kind of create a pipeline of people that can eventually be employed there. And then the school is going to create a program that you can get this certification for. So I also noticed, Cooper is Amazon's $10 billion project to launch more than 3,000 satellites that will offer high-speed internet to tens of millions of people around the world. So that's the point of that project, and they're partnering with the school. So part of why I brought this up is that obviously you are a higher education. So do you have any partnerships with other local corporations such as Amazon or something else?
We partner with a number of local companies. It's an interesting fact about our region that we don't produce nearly enough of the higher ed degrees that are required by the local economy. And so local companies have to import a lot of employees from outside the region
because Seattle specifically?
The greater Seattle area that, encompassing the east side as well, that there are a lot of needs, especially in STEM fields and in advanced manufacturing, like in this case, that are just not generated by the higher ed institutions in the region. They're just, if you compare us to other regions, we have a low density of higher ed institutions here, and there's a shortage of graduates.
Really?
And so the result is the need for companies to import workers from other parts of the country or around the world, which is much more expensive than recruiting locally. Mm-hmm. And so what I love about this story is this is a local company that's now investing in a higher ed institution to help them generate the workforce that they need for this project. And we're always looking for how we can partner with the local community to provide what's needed here. The needs are in STEM, they're in healthcare, and we're eager to ramp up our scale to meet that need. We have partnerships with companies who send employees here to upskill, to advance through their organization. They help them with their tuition. This is true in the business school. It's true in the College of Science and Engineering. Programs in leadership, programs in advanced topics in computer science and engineering. And we have a great partnership with T-Mobile, actually, where T-Mobile has been investing in the technology on our campus. So this story is about getting access to satellite internet. For us, the challenge was Wi-Fi on our campus, and it was good inside the buildings, but not outside. And T-Mobile has helped us make the whole campus 5G compatible, and we're expanding out our partnership with them to be one of the most wired campuses in the country.
Yeah. So are you saying that companies aren't asking you for more comm majors?
The fact is, almost every discipline that we offer, there's good demand in the workforce. You think about the humanities, the skills that you learn in the humanities, those are in demand as well. And, the kind of analytic skills, but also writing skills, even, and maybe I would say especially in the era of generative AI, the ability to understand text and produce compelling text is going to become more important. So I wouldn't discount any of our disciplines at all, but where there are specific shortages in our region, really, it's healthcare, it's engineering, computer science, and advanced manufacturing are just areas where we're not producing nearly enough graduates in those fields.
Interesting. So. Anything else you want to say before we close out?
No, just make a plug for Seattle University. We're, we are a university that's on the move. We're growing, and we are really excited about the direction that we're headed. We recently got the largest art gift ever given to a university, and we're working on building an art museum to house that collection. And we just changed athletic conferences into the West Coast Conference, which was the conference of all the other Jesuit schools on the West Coast of the United States. So we're just we're excited about where we're headed, and eager to continue to build connections into the business community here, and look forward to welcoming you and others to our campus in the future.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for doing this with me. And we wish you the best with Seattle University.
Thank you.
Thanks. This has been The Weekly. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at theweeklyseattle@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.